Welcome back to the Business Book Club. Today we're opening up a really foundational text, one that I think fundamentally shifts how we think about productivity. We are diving into Peter F. Drucker's absolute classic, The Effective Executive, the definitive guide to getting the right things done.
And, right out of the gate, Drucker offers something that should be a massive relief, really, to anyone feeling overwhelmed. He argues that effectiveness isn't some innate talent, some natural gift you either have or you don't. It's a discipline. It's a set of practices, things that can be learned. And he says it's the specific necessary job of the executive.
Yeah, I appreciate how he just immediately dismisses that whole idea of needing to be a genius.
Yeah.
He points out, quite bluntly, that people with huge intellectual gifts are often, and this is his phrase, strikingly ineffectual. So you don't need to be brilliant. You need to be effective. That's what counts. Effectiveness is what translates, intellect and knowledge into actual results for the organization.
It's a really key distinction. And speaking of executive, Drucker clarifies something important there, too. He's not just talking about the C-suite or senior management. Functionally, he says, if you're a knowledge worker, it could be a professional, a scientist, a mid-level manager, and your contribution significantly impacts the organization's performance, well, you are, in effect, an executive.
Okay, right. So if effectiveness is this learnable discipline, why does it often feel like we're constantly, failing to maintain it? What are the challenges? What does Drucker say is structurally working against the knowledge worker?
Well, he identifies four, let's call them harsh realities that are kind of built into modern organizations. And these realities conspire, essentially, to push executives towards futility, towards being ineffective. These are the obstacles we really have to consciously overcome.
Okay, let's start with the one I think everyone feels, the tyranny of the clock. Time.
Exactly. The first reality is simply that your time is rarely your own. The executive, he says, is a captive of the organization. You're always responding, always reacting. Demands from colleagues, superiors, internal systems, they control your schedule. We've all been there, right? Yeah. That 9 a.m. meeting that was supposed to be quick and ends up eating the whole morning. That's the reality he's talking about.
Yeah, definitely. And the second reality seems to flow directly from that lack of time control. We're constantly forced to just operate.
We get pushed into reacting to the daily flow of events. The crises, the urgent problems popping up, the endless emails demanding an immediate response. And this means we end up focused on just sort of keeping the lights on operationally. Instead of focusing on the truly important strategic work that actually drives long-term contribution, you react instead of acting proactively.
Okay, then there's the dependence issue, reality 3. Your brilliant idea or contribution is only effective if other people actually use it. And those people, colleagues, maybe even your boss, are often outside your direct control, aren't they?
Absolutely. You depend on cooperation, influence, persuasion, not just direct authority. Your work needs uptake.
And the final one, this inside versus outside focus.
Right. The executive exists inside the organization. And inside, all we ever really see are efforts and costs. The budgets, the hours people put in, the internal processes. But results, Drucker hammers this home, results only ever lie on the outside, with the customer, in the market, through some kind of public impact. So if you don't actively, consciously look outward, you completely lose sight of actual performance.
Wow. Okay, those 4 realities together make a really powerful case for why effectiveness has to be a conscious discipline. You've got to learn practices to counteract them. Which brings us, I guess, to Drucker's famous 5 habits, these interconnected habits of mind and action.
That's right. Habit 1, know thy time. Time, he says, is the unique, completely inelastic limiting factor. You can't buy more. You can't store it. Therefore, effective executives must systematically record where their time actually goes. Because our memory, as Drucker shows with tons of examples, is just incredibly unreliable about this.
Oh, I remember that anecdote about the company chairman. Thought he spent half his time on customers and strategy. Turns out, after tracking, he was basically a glorified telephone dispatcher dealing with internal stuff. Painfully relatable. And this idea of consolidating time is critical here too, isn't it?
It is. Hugely critical. You simply cannot accomplish complex knowledge work like writing a key report or thinking through strategy by dedicating these little 15-minute driblets here and there. You need what Drucker calls a minimum quantum of time, a large, continuous, protected block, maybe 90 minutes, maybe half a day, whatever it takes for that specific task.
And it's not just about personal discipline. He connects it to organizational health. I like that proactive action he suggests, systematically asking your colleagues, what do I do that wastes your time?
Yeah, that's powerful because the answers often reveal systemic organizational flaws, not just your own bad habits. It's diagnostic.
Okay, moving to habit 2, focus on contribution. This sounds like shifting from effort to results, right? And looking beyond just your own little silo.
Exactly. It's about results over effort and focusing on the purpose of the whole organization, not just the narrow specialty of your department. So instead of defining your job by what you manage, like I run the accounting team, you define it by the contribution you make. I ensure managers get the data they need to make the right profit-maximizing decisions. Drucker says the person who thinks that way is operating as top management, whatever their actual rank or title.
That really shifts your perspective, doesn't it?
Radically. We see this in his example of that bank's agency vice president. On paper, that department was purely clerical, just processing paperwork. But by focusing on contribution, the VP realized their true role was actually as a marketing force. Why? Because they were in direct, trusted contact with senior financial executives at client companies. They could position the entire bank for major deals.
Wow, so realizing your functional impact can be way bigger than just your technical job description implies. And contribution isn't only about direct results, is it? He mentions other areas.
Correct. It's results, yes, that's primary. But also the building of values, that shared commitment, the ethical standards, that's crucial. And thirdly, developing people. If you're not growing your human capital, your talent, the organization is going to eventually just wither.
Okay, habit 3. This one might be the most challenging for people because it kind of flies in the face of a lot of modern HR thinking, making strength productive. He says the well-rounded person is basically a prescription for mediocrity. That's quite a statement.
It is, but it's central to his thinking. Look, the whole purpose of an organization, he argues, is to make individual strengths combine to create joint performance, and in doing so, making individual weaknesses irrelevant, or at least manageable. Strong people, he points out, always have strong weaknesses. Always. If you try to hire or promote only based on the absence of flaws, you'll end up with a team of perfectly competent but ultimately uninspired non-entities. Mediocrity, as he says.
But practically, what about that superstar who's brilliant, but, maybe difficult, or even corrosive to team morale? Drucker seems to suggest you tolerate the flaw if the strength is relevant enough.
His argument is, you staff to maximize strength, not to minimize weakness. The weakness only matters if it undermines the required contribution. He uses that famous case of Abraham Lincoln and General Grant during the Civil War. Lincoln had hired plenty of well-rounded, supposedly flawless generals. They all failed to win. Grant, well, he was a known alcoholic, a significant weakness, but he had one overwhelming, relevant strength. He knew how to win battles. Lincoln tolerated the drinking because that specific strength was absolutely critical to the main objective.
So the weakness is only really disqualifying if it directly sabotages the needed contribution. But there is one absolute non-negotiable, isn't there? Integrity.
That's the one. The only truly disqualifying weakness. Drucker gives a very simple but powerful test for appraisal. You ask yourself, if I had a son or daughter, would I be willing to have him or her work under this person? If the answer is no, then regardless of their competence or their results, they lack integrity and must be removed. Integrity is the bedrock.
That's a stark test. Okay, moving on to habit 4, concentration. Or, first things first. The secret to effectiveness is simple, he says, doing one thing at a time. But the real challenge isn't setting priorities, it's setting the posteriorities, what you decide not to do.
Exactly, deciding what to abandon. And that takes immense courage. Why? Because almost every posterior or every activity or project you stop doing is inevitably someone else's top priority. It probably has momentum, maybe a long history, political backing. It's hard to kill things.
Right, and this is where his tool of systematic abandonment comes in. Sounds quite formal.
It's a discipline. It's like a mandatory audit you perform periodically on every ongoing program, every activity. You have to ask the guiding question. If we did not already do this, knowing what we know now, would we go into it?
And if the answer isn't an enthusiastic, unconditional yes,
then you have to seriously consider curtailing it or dropping it altogether. This is vital because you must free up resources, especially your best people, who are always scarce for new opportunities. Drucker notes that focusing energy on solving problems only restores yesterday's balance. It brings you back to zero. Concentrating on opportunities is what actually creates tomorrow's results.
that completely reframes problem solving, doesn't it? It's necessary maintenance, maybe, but it's not the main path to effectiveness.
Precisely. It's an essential part of the discipline of concentration, focusing limited resources where they can produce the greatest results.
Okay, which leads us to the final discipline, habit 5, making effective decisions. Drucker sees decision-making not as like a flash of brilliance, but as a systematic process, a judgment, a choice between alternatives.
Yes. And the crucial step here, the one that often surprises people, is his insistence on disagreement. Drucker fundamentally believed you should never make an important decision unless there is organized conflict around it, unless you have really explored the alternatives, understood the risks, heard dissenting views.
That sounds great in theory, but in reality, doesn't inviting conflict and disagreement just slow everything down, especially when you feel like you need to move fast?
Drucker would argue that superficial consensus, everyone quickly agreeing, is actually much slower in the long run. Because you haven't really understood the core issues, you haven't tested the assumptions. He tells that great story about Alfred Sloan at General Motors postponing a top management meeting simply because everyone was in complete agreement on a major decision.
Right, Sloan apparently said something like they needed more time to develop disagreement and perhaps gain some understanding of what the decision is all about.
Exactly. Because decisions made without exploring valid alternatives often fall apart during execution. People haven't bought in, or unforeseen problems arise that dissent might have uncovered. It requires intellectual humility.
It also shifts the starting point of the process, doesn't it? He says decisions don't start with facts.
No, they start with opinions, which should be treated as exactly that. Untested hypotheses. You need a criterion of relevance, basically, a judgment about what matters before you can even determine which facts are necessary to gather or how to interpret them. Otherwise, you just end up drowning in data that might have no actual bearing on the choice you need to make.
And critically, a decision isn't really made until it's converted into action steps.
Absolutely. You have to assign responsibility. Specify who has to know about the decision, what action they specifically must take, and importantly, how that action must be phrased or framed so the people doing the work can actually execute it effectively.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize these 5 habits. If you're an entrepreneur, a knowledge worker listening today, what are the key actionable lessons?
Well, I think it truly boils down to rigorous self-management. First, you absolutely have to diagnose where your time is really going. Measure it, don't guess, use a time log. And once you know, you have to be ruthless about shielding those large, continuous blocks of time for your highest contribution work. Protect that time.
Right, and then that big mindset shift. Focus on leveraging strengths, not fixing weaknesses. Relentlessly focus on making strengths productive your own and those of your team. Stop trying to make everyone well-rounded. Find where their one great strength can win the battle, like Lincoln did with Grant.
Exactly. And finally, build disagreement into your decision-making process, especially for significant choices. If everyone around the table is nodding along too easily, that's a red flag. You haven't done the work. Force yourself and your team to articulate and genuinely explore valid alternatives before you commit.
You know, Peter Drucker was writing this decades ago, but his work feels, if anything, more urgent now than ever. He connects this personal effectiveness to something much bigger, doesn't he?
He really does. He argues that executive effectiveness isn't just a nice-to-have tool for getting a promotion or making more money. He sees it as a societal imperative. Why? Because modern society depends fundamentally on the productivity and contribution of its knowledge workers. If these specialized knowledge workers who are prone, he noted, to alienation, boredom, and frustration if their work lacks impact. If they can't translate their expertise into results, then the organizations fail and society itself is weakened.
Wow. So mastering these disciplines isn't just about personal success. It's the key to ensuring our organizations function, and maybe even the key to ensuring individuals find achievement and purpose in their work within those organizations.
That's the essential connection he makes. It links personal fulfillment and productivity directly to the viability and health of modern society. High stakes.
A really stunning argument that absolutely still holds true today. Well, if you enjoyed this deep dive into the foundational disciplines of getting the right things done, make sure you subscribe to the Business Book Club. We'll be back next time with another essential classic. Now, that's a wrap for this episode of the Business Book Club. If you enjoyed the ride, make sure to subscribe so you'll never miss our next deep dive. Got a favorite business book you'd love us to explore? Let us know. We're always up for a good read. And hey, don't keep all these insights to yourself. Share this episode with a fellow book lover or your work buddy who's always looking to level up. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and we'll see you in the next episode.